Hello and welcome into another episode of the Fantasy Football Forecast. I'm your host, Trevor Scott, joined by my co-host, Matt Giraldi. And today we are coming at you with bold predictions. So we are very excited to get into this. Don't make any rankings adjustments based on this. It's more to give you a feel for how we feel about certain players, positively or negatively. We're going in blind to this. So I've got 5, Matt's got 5. Let's get straight into it. So my first bold prediction is going to be that Brian Thomas Jr. finishes as wide receiver 1 overall. I know with Chase that seems a little bit far-fetched, but I think that there's a chance that he goes in and is just getting insane volume right from the kick. And I don't think that's being factored in enough to his profile. He had double-digit targets 6 straight weeks to finish the year last year after the bye, and that was all with Mac Jones. So theoretically, Trevor Lawrence should be better than Mac Jones. And I know Travis Hunter is there, but I think that's to soak up a little bit more of the Evan Engram role. There's still plenty of targets for him to go around, even if Brian Thomas Jr. is being just a target magnet. So I think that Thomas can operate at all levels of the field. He's always been a touchdown scorer his whole career. He had 17 his last year at LSU. He had 10 last year in his first year as a pro. And I don't think his upside is getting stressed enough from a lot of people in the ranking or in the community. I feel like it's just, kind of putting him at the end of that top 8. And I think he just has more upside than that because I think the touchdown upside is through the roof. So that's my first bold prediction. Brian Thomas Jr., wide receiver 1 this year.
Love that one. Very excited about BTJ. Played most of his games with Mac Jones. Gets a huge upgrade at play caller as well. So that's definitely a fun one, and I hope that happens. My first one is a little bit bold, but I will say that Kittle finishes as the tight end 1 on the season. Now, if you look at last year, he was the tight end 1 in points per game scoring, but he's consistently being drafted as the tight end 3. We know Brock Bowers is going to get a ton of targets. We know Trey McBride is going to have a monster season if he can find his way into the end zone. But when you're looking at the San Francisco 49ers right now, it's really Pearsall is the only wide receiver, and then it's going to be running heavily through CMC and Kittle.
And with Kittle, we've been talking about it. Like, he hasn't topped 100 targets in like 5 years. And so this feels like the year where that might happen if they're going to be struggling with injury at wide receiver all year. So I like that call, although I don't know that I think that's going to happen, but that's why we're going bold here. So my next bold prediction is that Emeka Egbuka finishes as a top 12 wide receiver. So I think that there's just opportunity out the wazoo for Egbuka to step in. The fact that Godwin is banged up and isn't going to start the year healthy, and that McMillan also is going to start on IR with his neck injury. The offense is still looking to pass, and Evans can only get so much volume. It's not like he's a big volume play as it is. He's much more of downfield threat, red zone threat. And so if it's going to be Egbuka outside and in the slot, they've touted how much he's been able to move around, how smart he is, how he understands the offense. I think that this just might be hit the ground running type of situation. And I don't even know if this is going to end up being so bold. If he comes out and gets like 10 targets in week 1, everybody's going to be like, oh, no, this is not good. We should have had him inside our top 20 wide receivers going into the season. And so, I think top 12 too, we have that tier of 11 that we were really confident in. And 12 was just kind of like, oh no, this is kind of the start of a glob here. And obviously, Egbuka is going way later in drafts, but I still really think the opportunity and the player are extremely good.
When I was driving out to our draft with our buddy, I was like, I just want to rank Egbuka wide receiver 19. And it's funny because one of my bold predictions was very similar, but it was Egbuka finishes as the best Ohio State wide receiver this year. So he beats out JSN, Garrett Wilson, Terry McLaurin, Marvin Harrison, and Chris Olave. And if he does get to that top 12, that is very realistic. Now, McLaurin did sign his contract, which is a good sign, but McLaurin's stats year over year have been basically identical, minus the big spike in touchdowns last season. If JSN, isn't as good with Sam Darnold, we know Garrett Wilson has quarterback issues. We know Olave has quarterback issues, and we know Marv, if they just send him on the boundary like they did last year, Egbuka should wipe the floor with him.
My third bold prediction here, and it's on Isiah Pacheco. My bold prediction here is that he finishes outside of the top 35 running backs this season. And people have been touting him as a great running back, 0 running back target. And just as somebody who is kind of hanging around in that top 24 range, we saw him go in round 9 of our drafts, and I just could not be less interested. I feel like all of the competition they brought Kareem Hunt back. They brought in a pass catching specialist who actually caught 2 passes in their last preseason game with the ones. So he was out there on passing downs. They made a point to target him. It's just something where I just don't know that the role is going to match what we're hoping for. And if he is still less explosive, like we saw at the end of last year, if the injury just kind of sapped enough of his athleticism, I think that we could see Kareem Hunt on the goal line, which really limits his upside rushing, and he's not out there on third downs. It's just something that I just can't with Pacheco, and so predicting him outside the top 35 running backs.
That's so funny you say that, because when I was first kind of jotting down some notes, and the original list that was a little bit bigger than the 5 I settled on, I had Pacheco as a constant on the waiver wire this season. So I'm definitely there with you. So that'll be interesting to see what happens. And another one of my bold predictions was, I guess, kind of coincides with your first one about Brian Thomas Jr. finishing as the wide receiver 1, was I have LSU wide receivers finishing 1, 2, and 3. So whether that's Chase, JJ, BTJ, and Neighbors, some combination of those guys. Obviously, Chase and JJ are being drafted that way already. We know Neighbors and BTJ have sky high ceilings. So let's get a Tigers 1, 2, 3 finish this year.
I like that. So, going with the Ohio State versus LSU wide receiver U, little bit in your bold predictions here, who's going to come out on top. So, no, I like that. I like that call. Obviously, with the two guys up top, the bold part is maybe a little bit more of like Neighbors, but I feel like Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr. having two options that could jump to that 3 spot is a good call. Going down to my 4th bold prediction here now. I feel like you'll like this one, and this goes against the grain quite a bit from what we've been hearing in the news in general, is on Ricky Pearsall. So my bold prediction on Ricky Pearsall is, by the time we get to the fantasy football playoffs, he's going to be the number 5 option on the San Francisco 49ers offense, and he's going to be completely unstartable. And so that's not clearly defined really, but I think we'll have a feel for if that's right or not by the time we get there. I do expect that he's going to be pretty solid to start the year. He's been kind of lighting up camp. He's the only option in the wide receiver room currently that's there. But I do think once Jennings is healthy and once Ayuk is healthy and back, that we might just see such a muddied room there. And as long as McCaffrey and Kittle are healthy, they're going to be drawing a ton of targets as well. So I just think the Pearsall hype going into drafts has been justified because he is going to be the only game in town to start. I just haven't been able to get there because I looked a little bit further down the line. I'm not really drafting him as a starter at the early part of the year, maybe as a flex option, but I just don't want to pick somebody who I feel like their value is going to decline over the year. And that's how I feel about Ricky Pearsall.
If you guys are in the camp where that's how you view it, something I did in our draft this past weekend was I just took Ayuk with a super late round pick. I can throw him in IR as long as I want. And then, by the time he does come back, rosters should be more settled. So that's definitely a strategy that I can get behind there. Moving over to my next one, I have Cam Ward finishing higher this season than Bo Nix. So this kind of has to do with Cam Ward finishing into there we go.
That is bold.
Yes. So I'm thinking like the back end of QB1 territory. So maybe 11, 12, Bo Nix drops down to like 13 or 14. But this isn't something that I necessarily would have thought about Cam Ward a couple months ago, but all throughout camp, all throughout the offseason, everything has just been glowing. He's looking great. He's got a revamped offensive line. He's got Calvin Ridley. Alec Manor is someone that you and I have been really in on all offseason, and hopefully he continues to be a good presence for him. But I just think, kind of the underrated part about Cam Ward is, we know he is a gunslinger, but he also has scrambling ability that could lead to more rush yards than maybe we're necessarily accounting for. And what I mean by that is, think of like CJ Stroud or Patrick Mahomes once it's playoff time, right? They're running a lot more than we see during the regular season. If Cam Ward gets in that groove, or maybe, they're not as good as obviously the Chiefs, and he has to rely on his legs a little bit, he gets, 3 scores on the ground and is the passer that we all hope he can be. I don't necessarily think that's out of the question. And my take on Bo Nix, I think he's in for a big regression. I think the defense is fantastic and the run game's improved, so they might not necessarily need to rely on him as much anyway. We know the wide receiver 2 on that team is very much in flux outside of Cortland Sutton, obviously at the top. So this is something that maybe I'm trying to will into existence because I did take him in our super flex draft, Cam Ward that is. But, this is also a number one overall pick too. And I know he's probably the least hyped number one pick maybe of all time at the quarterback position. That's nothing to sneeze at.
Listening to you talk about those two is just getting me absolutely fired up to watch them play in week 1. They go head to head. And if Cam Ward looks good against that Broncos defense, man, are we going to be way more excited about him going into the rest of the year. So I feel like maybe he outscores him in week 1 and this prediction gets off to the races. So that'll be fun to watch. And then my last bold prediction here is, again, another guy that's kind of turning into the darling of the offseason as we push closer and closer to drafts, is on George Pickens. So my bold prediction here is he finishes with less than 100 targets and outside of the top 30 at wide receiver. I feel like he's been consistently pushed up and kind of touted as a starter, either a wide receiver 2 or a flex play, depending on your league size. And he's been so boom bust in the past, and I know they want to throw the ball a lot. And I know there's been a lot of, like, even CeeDee Lamb saying, you look over here, you see a 1, you look over there, you see a 1, but I just don't know that he's going to see the target volume to really be that. And I know a lot of people are like, oh, you got to go in on Pickens. He's finally out of the bad situation. He's in a situation now where they're going to be throwing the ball a lot. And we tout all that same stuff too, but I just am a little bit weary here that he's going to get this super fantasy relevant role. There hasn't really been a receiver that's been incredibly fantasy relevant across from CeeDee Lamb. It was like Amari Cooper at the beginning when it was kind of transitioning over to Lamb. But then once Lamb established himself, it was like Brandon Cooks, Michael Gallup. Like, we were hoping for Jalen Tolbert there for a while, and nothing ever materialized. I get that Pickens is more talented than those guys, but for me, it's just a little bit hard to get on board with a role specifically that we've never really seen pan out to anything even kind of relevant. So, I don't expect Jake Ferguson to go away. He's healthy. He'll be good. And CD, we could see him get 170 targets. So there should be enough to go around for other pass catchers, but I don't know. I just found myself never really being there on Pickens where he was getting drafted.
Yeah, and I've had Pickens in, I think, 2 of the last 3 years in our home league. And it's like, yes, he's a talented player, but it's like wide receiver 39, wide receiver 30, wide receiver 42. And to me, it's like, when I look at last season, like, obviously Justin Fields started the year. We know he's not great as a passer, but Pickens' game suits Russ's game kind of perfectly, in my opinion, just with those moon balls and Pickens' ability to get open downfield. And then he doesn't have the competition of CeeDee Lamb across from him. Now, obviously, Pittsburgh throws the ball less than Dallas, but my biggest issue with owning Pickens is, like, he starts the game, 40-yard circus catch. You're like, oh, let's go. Then he disappears, and then he has a touchdown called back, and then he has a pass interference called, and then he's getting in a fight, and then he has 2 more catches, and it's like 3 for 49. And I'm just like, why did I start this guy? This was just kind of a headache the whole time.
Yeah. And then it's just randomly with Mason Rudolph, he'll catch 2 deep touchdowns, and then it's like, okay, his final line ends up 6 for 150 and 2 touchdowns. But really it was like 2 for 110 and 2 touchdowns. And then the rest of it was like 4 for 40, and it's just like, if he doesn't nail those long touchdowns, he's just not worth starting. So, in the bad situation in the Steelers, he was getting double-digit targets thrown in there too. And it was just, when he got that kind of volume, the catch percentage just would plummet for him. So I don't expect him to get that target volume, obviously, based on not projecting him for 100 targets. And so, obviously Dak is a better deep ball thrower than what he's been dealing with outside of maybe Russ. But yeah, I just unfortunately am not there with Pickens.
The last one for me, this one feels pretty bold. I was going to go with Justin Fields finishing outside the top 20, but I know we have him ranked pretty low anyway, so that one just feels a little bit less fun at this point. But I'm going to pivot, and I'm going to go with someone who just came to mind, and I'm going to go with TreVeyon Henderson as the highest scoring rookie running back, obviously finishing above Marion Hampton and Ashton Jeanty. So we're going super bold here. We've going all in on this one. And I think, Hampton was someone who we talked about, being potentially able to supplant Jeanty, and then the left tackle goes down. Like, now we're getting reports that Najee is going to be back maybe sooner than we thought. And then with Jeanty being on the Raiders, like, the Raiders and the Patriots are maybe fairly comparable in terms of, like, they're not just necessarily going to be these high projected scoring offenses. And TreVeyon, is going to get a ton of work in the pass game. We know he's electric, and maybe just maybe it's a little bit harder to run in the Big Ten than it is the Mountain West. So maybe Jeanty doesn't perform as well as we think in his first year in the NFL. I still absolutely love him, but I just haven't been able to spend first round draft picks on him. And TreVeyon's been someone who I've been on, forever and got him in our home league. So let's go.
Yeah, no, and I think the major thing there is going to be the volume. If he gets rushing volume, I think that's much more likely to happen. And maybe that's the bold prediction part of it, is by week 4 or 5, he's actually getting 10 plus carries a game on top of his expected, heavy dose of passing game work. So yeah, I mean, if the sooner Henderson can take over as the workhorse, the better that prediction looks. And with that, those are our bold predictions for the 2025 season. We look forward to talking to you the next one.